So welcome to the Introduction to Ethics in America, to our ethics course. Glad you could all come out here tonight. First of all, then, I want to show you what some people think philosophy is. This shows you a philosophical field trip. People come out into empty space. You mean this is it? And there's really nothing to hold on to. Philosophy seems to be just all in the mind. For many people, we look for some kind of a security, something solid, and in philosophy, everything seems to move around, and it doesn't seem to make much sense. Often it appears like this here, like a puzzle, and the pieces don't seem to fit together. Sometimes they do seem to fit. When we look at the history of philosophy and treat philosophy historically, looking back, why did people start doing philosophy? It maybe starts to begin to make a little more sense. I want to show you a picture over which I usually ask students to meditate, to look at it for a while. All of these pictures, actually, in a normal classroom setting, I ask students to look at it for a longer period and have your feedback and have you think about what it could mean. This picture specifically tells us quite a bit about the story of philosophy. I don't know if you recognize it. It's sort of an Eastern picture. Some people would call it a mandala. Your mind focuses towards the center, and in the center there's a triangle, and those triangles keep repeating themselves into the outer circuits of the picture. Meditating about it, thinking about it, what would it tell us? That life has a focus, that it is not like this, where everything is scattered, that there is some kind of a focus somewhere. And that was the realization of the early philosophers. Philosophy started in Greece. And then to say even that philosophy started in Greece may be a mistake, because philosophy, all people had some kind of a philosophy. The Greeks were different insofar that they started to philosophize in a systematic manner. They made a system out of it. They invented logic. Why the Greeks? Now, there are several reasons. People usually would bring three easy ones. The Greeks were prosperous. Their land produced quite a bit, so they had time to sit around. They did a lot of traveling to foreign cultures, so they had a lot of contact with other cultures. And today, just in the last 20 years, we have found quite some interesting evidence how far the Greeks actually traveled and what kind of a contact people had in those days. As far as India, we have today connections. We know about connections between Pythagoras, who was one of the first philosophers, and early Indian philosophy. So somehow they were in communication with each other, even as far as China. One reason that is not often mentioned, and I'd like you to consider a timeline of philosophy. I want to put that on the board here. This is not, here we go. A timeline. 0 here, the beginning of our time was the birth of Christ. 400 to 600, this is the BC, the time when major philosophy in Greece developed. 300, you could say. This was the high time of Greek Athenian democracy. 800, we have the first written documents. Incidentally, that's one of the reasons, too, why the Greeks are so important, because they left us a whole body of books and writings, and we can go back to them. All other cultures had their philosophies, as I said before, because philosophy is mostly concerned with two things: with how to live a happy life And where do we come from? What is the meaning of this life? So if we go further back here, the first written documents are Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey. And they write about a period 1200 BC. The battle for Troy, and then Odysseus' trip back home. We know now that there was a very extensive culture existing before this time, not only in Greece. They were centered in Greece on Crete, on the island of Crete, but also in India. And something happened around this period, 1600 to 1200, that made that early culture disappear. It destroyed it. And out of the ruins, basically, philosophy developed. So philosophy was a response to the question, why are we not as happy anymore as people used to be in the olden days? The early philosophers, the early historians, in this time period here, already talked about a golden age that has been lost. Remember in the Bible? Paradise. Same story. There was at one point a time when people lived in relative peace with each other. And before, say, 1960, people sort of just assumed, well, maybe that's just made up. Maybe it's just their desires for peace. They didn't think that there was actually a period when people lived peacefully together. We know now, today, we have found archaeological evidence that there was a very long period of thousands of years where people lived actually in harmony with each other. And some scholars today say that the reason for that harmony was that because in those days men and women had equal status. There was not a difference between a hierarchy, a holy order, a natural order, between the two sexes where the men were the dominators and women were underneath. Ever since domination was established, people also tried to find out what is lost. They had some good ideas, but mostly they were wrong in trying to find the answers. So we have 2,000 years of philosophy. One could say that they're basically looking for the wrong answers. Finding some good answers, and we certainly shouldn't throw it all out. Certainly it makes sense to be logical. But to be just logical and forget that the purpose of life is not being logical, but the purpose of life is to be happy, isn't it? To survive. Sometimes logic helps us to survive. Sometimes logic helps us to be happy. But what logic most of all has done is giving a tool to those who are in power to keep that power. And that's what the Greeks have started, and it went all through Western civilization. When Western civilization came in contact with other civilizations, India, Africa, they looked always, America of course too, they looked down upon those cultures because they thought that they had the answers. Now they never really did have the answers. They just followed the Greek idea that the answer is available, it's somewhere out there. Question is, where did it come from, if the answer is out there? And that it is possible for the human mind to know that answer. So those who are on the way to finding the answer, Western civilization, always thought that they were better than everybody else because they didn't think anybody else was even looking. Well, they were looking too. They were looking for how to live a happy life, which is what Greek philosophy started out with. But somehow it got perverted into looking who is right and who is wrong. This is why I say, when we do ethics today, it's still about how to live a happy life. And that means for different people, different things. Where Aristotle said, It means for all people